So, I was on my way to work, just as normal as any other day, really. Same time, same route, same music, same coffee. In fact, I almost made it there too. In all honesty, I don't remember what made me drive off the road and into a ditch totaling my car like that. I don't remember the crash. I swear to this day that I made it to the next stop sign and got behind a black Dodge Challenger and made the next right turn behind it as well. It must have been an out-of-body experience because my car and I were in a ditch 20 to 30 feet before that stop sign. Fast forward, I woke up in the hospital disoriented and confused. I had never been in a hospital bed staring at the ceiling before, so I guess I was asked the routine questions. Do you know where you are? And me being me, I said something like, it's not heaven, I probably wouldn't be going there, so I guess a hospital? Do you know why you're here? And for the love of all that's good, I just could not remember one single bit of it. I legitimately thought that I made it to the stop sign. I didn't even know that I had a car accident. So I said, no, what happened? Is there anyone you'd like for us to contact? I didn't remember that I was married, much less remember the name of my spouse. But it was at this moment when I looked up and saw at the foot of my bed 3 large shadows. There was one officer at the window to my left, 2 nurses on my right between the bed and the wall, and the doctor was at my hip to my left. I asked, why so many people? And the doctor said that the nurses had to be there and the cop had to do a report. I pointed at the shadows at the foot of my bed, but they were now gone. The doc confirmed that there's nobody there, but still dazed and confused, the officer now standing at my hip and the doctor at the foot of the bed told me that I was in a car accident. So I asked if there was anybody else injured, people in the other vehicle, walking pedestrians, if maybe I hit an animal or something. But no, just you. It was just you is what they told me. I try to be a good person, so maybe it was the relief that I didn't hurt anyone else. I started to cry, and the officer kindly wished me a speedy recovery and made his way out. I sort of wiped away my tears and opened my eyes, and like the worst jump scare in a 3D movie, there was an old man in my face repeatedly saying, "Help me," and I just froze up. I felt my heart skip a beat, hair stood up on my arms, legs and neck. I sensed my blood pressure drop and the heart monitor made its noise. Trying to evaluate the situation as best as I could, as quickly as I could, I looked around, and the nurses who were to my right just a moment ago were gone. I must have missed the moment that they left, but to my left was the old man, and it wasn't just him anymore. There were 4, what I can only describe as phantoms, screaming at me for help, 3 male and 1 female. The nurses rushed back in because of the beeping machine attached to me, and at that, I passed out. When I woke up, there was a surgeon telling me the extent of my injuries, which they're not really relevant to this story, but I asked him to send up the hospital priest, and he tried to press for information as to why I wanted the priest, but I simply told him that I wanted someone to pray for me. And after that, again, I passed out. The time lapses between sort of passing out and waking up here were never clear to me, but sometime I woke up again and the priest was there with me. He stood to my right in plain clothes, asked why I wanted him there, and I asked him to close the door. After he did, I told him everything that I saw. The shadow people, the old man, and the other 3 with him asking for help. I asked the priest to pray for any lost souls, to bless the room that I laid in, and to bless me with holy water. He told me that he understood my concern and would pray for me and come back to check on me later. I spent another 3 weeks laying in that hospital bed, passing out and waking up, and after making a full recovery, I've gone back to the hospital to visit the cathedral and thank that priest. I don't know if the prayers by the priest helped or not. I don't know what happened that night. All I can hope is that whatever he said, well, helped those poor people who were screaming for help. So just for the record, before I tell you guys what happened, I just want to say that this is the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me, and I have no idea what happened this night. So, I was drinking with my brother one night. The weather was bad, so the bars were closed and the streets were gross. We stepped out onto his front porch for a smoke, and that was when we saw him. A man. But not just an ordinary man. This guy honestly looked a bit like a zombie. He was groaning and dragging one leg behind him, and my brother and I watched, sort of puzzled as he got closer. Thinking that it was a joke, or maybe he was high or something, we just looked at each other and then back at the man. Then I looked behind him, and the tracks that he were leaving were in the snow, and he had definitely shuffled like this down the entire street. Stunned in silence, my brother and I just sort of watched on as he slowly made his way closer. Neither of us moved. We didn't really want to be honest. I guess we were a little bit frightened, but also very curious. But then he stopped. His head sort of snapped to look at us all of a sudden, and the sound that came out of this guy was unlike anything I've ever heard before. It was something that I'd never even heard in like horror movies or anything. My brother and I looked at each other though, threw our cigarettes down and ran inside. We got into his apartment and he grabbed a knife, I grabbed a fry pan. Don't judge me, it was the first thing that I saw that I could arm myself with. But we stood ready and watching, waiting for the fight of our lives with patient zero, and then just nothing. We waited, listened, we pepped each other up and eventually opened the door. We stepped out on the porch together and we looked everywhere, but nothing. This guy was gone. But the weirdest thing is that his tracks just ended where we last saw them. We searched and searched that area, and he was nowhere to be found. No footmarks, no continuation of that creepy drag mark, nothing. In fact, I would almost say that it looked like the guy just flew away. This is a bit of a strange one, I'll admit, but I would like to get your opinion on it. So last year, me and my girlfriend decided to go camping, as we were sick of being inside. So we packed our stuff and off we went into the wild. The first 2 days were great. We found a great spot and set up camp, we roasted s'mores, birdwatched, it was amazing. And well, the third day we were at the nearby lake watching a flock of ducks swim around on the water. We were at a picnic table just kind of talking when a girl approached us. She was young, maybe 15 or 16. She told us that her father had fallen and that she needed someone's help. We offered to call for help, but she said that he wasn't badly hurt and just needed someone strong to help get him up. We agreed, as my girlfriend knew first aid and we had a kit with us. So she led us into the forest along a trail until we got to a point where she said that they had gone off a trail because they had seen a certain bird and her father was an avid bird watcher. We were reluctant, I'll admit, but here was a little girl needing help with her father, so we did go after her. We reached her father eventually and, well, something just was not right about it. You see, he was on the ground like he had fallen, but he was old, like 70 at least, which was weird because she was like 16. She called him her father, not grandfather as well. In any case, she stayed up on a little ridge with my girlfriend while I went down and helped him out. I asked if he was hurt bad, and he said no, and that they were okay now and that we could leave. I remember looking up at my girlfriend, who was staring at this girl as if trying to telepathically communicate something to her, but she was looking at her father, and we helped him up to the trail, walked in silence while the girl talked about the birds that we saw until we got back to it, and once there, they both turned and just sort of stared at us, telling us that we could leave now. It was altogether a really strange situation, just a weird vibe all around. I really don't know how to describe it, but It was like the man didn't want her to go and get help or something, but since she had, he was trying his best to get us away from them the quickest way possible. Once we got back, we alerted the local authorities, but I don't think anything ever came of it. Once we got back home, my girlfriend looked into missing child cases from the area, but didn't find anything. But what if she wasn't from there, and he had taken her from somewhere else? Looking back now, I feel like we should have asked more questions, because the whole thing was just so strange. But we didn't, and honestly, I regret that. To preface this, I really love to drive. Like hours-long drives to nowhere with no destination in mind, just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns and eventually cities, and I'd usually take these drives at night since there was less traffic to worry about. I've done it since, well, I've had my license 4 or 5 years ago, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. And that was until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. But they're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a means of sort of coping with their alcoholism. Though, now that I've moved out and am in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. However, on the night that this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious with a whole host of personal issues that I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend. I couldn't focus on anything else, and I just decided that I should take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and just told me to be careful and to not be gone for too terribly long, since it was getting pretty late and he would worry about me. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and then I left. I drove around the city for what must have been about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life, so I decided to drive furthermore down those familiar dark, winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped around the bend, and was just admiring the vast empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight, in seemingly the middle of nowhere, the few houses miles back from the road, lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away and covered in snow. It was like something out of a horror movie, if I'm being honest, and I sort of half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror, or see someone clamber out from the patches of the trees dotting the horizon. The only light, though, came from my headlights, and even then I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back towards the city, I would head back to the city and then home. That roundabout was still maybe about 15 to 25 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. So as I'm rounding another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazards flashing maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of a sedan, dark-coloured, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder, while the rest was jutted out onto the road, like they had to pull over in a hurry but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car though, and I was the only motorist in sight. Cell phone reception is spotty at best in this part of the country, but more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed. which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any service. So, a lone female on the road at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside, with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried that something terrible had happened to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought that I needed to help. These roads, they don't get a lot of traffic late at night, and temperatures were well below freezing, and if someone had been hurt or was in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them but me. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle, I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut off the music, and called out, "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried that they were passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them, that's for sure. I told myself that I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything, I would leave, and the moment that there was reception, I would call it in. And if I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action just then. So again, I shout, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for a bit, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice saying, yeah." I was relieved at first, and was about to say something in response, or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed that there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the vehicle, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. Then, in my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car fast. And the person did not have any blood on them or appeared to be injured in any way. They were wearing a mask. Not like a face mask or COVID or ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks that you would see in the Purge movies. And they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was. I couldn't get a good look at it, but from its length and shape, my guess was that it was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar or something. I don't need to tell you, though, that as soon as I saw that, I slammed on the gas the moment that I noticed those things, and drove like a bat straight out of hell. But my heart was thundering my chest, and my entire body was shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste, and the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew that I had to get out of there immediately. I saw one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to follow or chase me, or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror, I then saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks, and no trace of blood on him either. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible as quickly as I could. As soon as I made it to the roundabout too, I turned towards town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have pretty much a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends, T, who was a police officer, to tell him what happened and what I should do. He was obviously concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was, did they follow me, etc., he told me since it was out of city limits that he couldn't really do much on his end, but he could get in contact with the local police or sheriff in that jurisdiction to take my statement and check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for the police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs and panic, I eventually managed to tell him what happened, not even 10 or so minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, super freaked for my safety, and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave and that I was okay, but I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me that they would go back to the spot that I told them the sedan had been at to take a look, and that they would try to catch the guys who did it, though with no cameras and no description of the men, I wasn't sure that they'd be able to. I mean, I didn't even get the license plate number, though at the time of my panic, the thought never even came to mind until the police were asking if I got it. Which meant that all they had to go off was a dark-colored sedan and two guys with masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made in fear that it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever it was they started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from the police about whether or not they had any leads, and I'm not sure they ever will. I'm just thankful, though, that I'm still here and that I didn't stop to get out of my car that night. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. I mean, what were they doing? Why? Was that blood on the inside of the car, or just a ruse to get more attention? If it was really blood, did they hurt somebody else? And what would have happened to me if I had stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late-night drives to anywhere, and I really hope that I never cross paths with those freaks ever again.